I found myself at the Hilton Hotel in downtown Albany, just a short walk from the Capitol building. It was a Thursday night, around 9 p.m. I wasn't there to check in or relax. I was there for a much darker reason. My wife, Louise, was there too, but not with me. She was spending the evening with her boyfriend, blissfully unaware that I had uncovered her secret. For months, I had known about her affair, and the knowledge had been gnawing at me, slowly corroding whatever peace I had left. Tonight, I'd finally decided to do something about it. The decision hadn't come lightly. I had spent countless sleepless nights agonizing over what the right move should be. A man can only suppress so much pain before he's forced to act. For months, I had tried to ignore the truth, telling myself the affair was just a phase, something Louise would eventually end on her own. But she hadn't. Louise was still seeing Daniel Atcheson while continuing to play the role of the loving, committed wife at home. We would sit and talk about our future, making plans that felt more like empty theater with each passing day. It was all lies, and she didn't mean a single word of it. I couldn't help but wonder what had gone wrong between us. Was I to blame? Had I driven her into another man's arms? Clearly, I wasn't enough for her anymore, not in the ways that mattered. I even entertained the idea of letting her carry on, hoping she'd eventually grow tired of Daniel and return to me. But deep down, I knew that was wishful thinking. Once she had tasted the thrill of something new, there was no coming back. I waited and watched, hoping for change that never came. In the end, I knew I had to confront the situation. It was better to end things now than to let the betrayal fester. Coming to terms with that decision took time. My grueling work schedule, 18-hour shifts at the hospital, sometimes back-to-back for days, left me little energy to process the reality of my failing marriage. Maybe that was part of the problem. Maybe Louise had turned to another man because I wasn't around enough. I didn't think I had neglected her, but clearly, she saw things differently. If she was unhappy, why hadn't she just told me? Why not be honest and ask for a divorce instead of sneaking around? Why continue to string me along, telling me she loved me when she clearly didn't mean it? The questions were endless, and the answers felt out of reach. So I came up with a plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. I wasn't there to get violent or make a scene. It wasn't worth it. My lawyer had warned me against doing anything rash, emphasizing that violence would only land me in trouble. I wasn't about to throw my life away by attacking her boyfriend. No, my goal was simple: to end this charade and reclaim some sense of dignity, even if it meant making Louise uncomfortable in the process. Let me introduce myself. My name is Jack Shackley. I'm 31 years old, born and raised in Albany. Or at least I was, an emergency room physician at the city's main hospital. I recently took a leave of absence because the job was burning me out. I've been running on fumes for years, working myself to the bone, and my doctor insisted I take a break before I collapsed. I didn't tell Louise about my leave because, honestly, she wouldn't care. That's the kind of person she is. Cold, self-absorbed, and indifferent to my struggles. Louise, my wife, is 30 years old and works as a loan officer for a national bank in the city. We live in a comfortable 2-bedroom apartment near the hospital, and thankfully, we don't have children. She's stunning, 5 feet 8 inches, with long, flowing brunette hair that always seems to turn heads. Men notice her wherever we go. I met her back in college, in an English class I was taking to fulfill a general education requirement. I was a science major, so I didn't care much for literature, but Louise quickly became my main focus. I asked her out, and the rest, as they say, is history. After graduation, we lived together for a couple of years before tying the knot shortly after I finished medical school. I was fortunate to graduate debt-free, thanks to my parents' support, though I worked every summer to contribute what I could. My dad owns a construction company, and I spent my summers doing manual labor on his sites, earning minimum wage to help pay for my education. Hard work is no stranger to me, and I've carried that ethic into my career as a doctor. Now, I earn a solid income, $120,000 last year alone, and Louise makes about $80,000 at the bank. Financially, we're in great shape, and my earning potential as an ER physician is enormous. In a few years, I could be making close to $600,000 annually. We had plans for a bright future. Starting a family, buying a house in the suburbs, and building a life together. At least that's what I thought. Clearly, Louise had other ideas. I discovered her affair by sheer chance. A nurse from the ER, who had met Louise at a holiday party, happened to see her at a downtown restaurant with Daniel. She recognized him too. More on that in a moment, and let me know. Tonight, I watched as Louise and Daniel strolled through the Hilton lobby, hand in hand, before disappearing into the elevator. I saw him press the button for the 12th floor, and the doors closed behind them. I stayed in the lobby, checked my watch, and ran through my plan one last time. This wasn't about revenge. It was about regaining control of my life. I had tolerated enough disrespect, and it was time to set things straight. I approached the front desk and asked to call Daniel Atcheson room. Daniel is a local businessman who runs a landscaping and property maintenance company. He's married with 2 sons, yet he somehow decided it was appropriate to have an affair with the loan officer at his bank, my wife. Daniel and Louise had been indulging in their clandestine relationship for nearly 2 years before I discovered the truth. The realization struck me like a freight train when I learned just how deeply my wife was betraying me. It was pure chance that exposed her infidelity. A nurse I worked with casually mentioned seeing Louise at a downtown restaurant over the weekend, accompanied by someone she called her friend Daniel. That weekend, I had been slogging through another 18-hour shift, juggling the usual chaos of alcohol-fueled violence. Stabbings, shootings, and everything in between. Meanwhile, Louise was out having a cozy dinner with her lover. The nurse recognized Daniel because his landscaping company had recently completed a retaining wall project for her husband. And just like that, Louise's secret was out in the open. A few days later, I decided to test the waters. While sitting at the kitchen table, I casually told Louise that Carol, the nurse, had seen her dining out with a friend at a nice restaurant. I didn't mention Daniel by name, though. I asked about the food, jokingly suggesting we should try it out sometime. Louise froze for a moment, her face pale, but she quickly recovered, brushing it off with a vague "it was fine" and changing the subject. That brief flicker of panic on her face was all the confirmation I needed. The following week, I started putting a plan into motion. I confided in my father, telling him I suspected Louise was unfaithful. He was shocked and disheartened. He had always liked Louise and had been looking forward to us starting a family. We spoke at length, hashing out a strategy to protect myself in the fallout of a likely separation. He promised to keep this between us, even from my mother, who would have been devastated by the news. Next, I approached my hospital supervisor and explained the personal crisis I was facing. She was empathetic but visibly disappointed, as she knew Louise personally. She agreed that I needed time off and arranged a 3-month leave for me to sort out my life. I also met with the hospital's in-house psychiatrist, who supported the decision, citing the immense stress I was under both professionally and personally. With their backing, I was free to focus on unraveling the mess my marriage had become. The final piece of the puzzle involved hiring a private investigator. Within a week, the investigator had pieced together a detailed account of Louise's affair with Daniel. Their meetings, their favorite spots, and even the hotels they frequented, it was all laid bare. Hotel clerks were more than willing to share records for the right price. A small bribe had produced a 2-year history of Daniel's regular visits to the same hotel, often accompanied by the same woman, my wife. Armed with undeniable proof, I knew it was time to act. Louise had no idea I was onto her. She thought I was working a long ER shift that day. I knew her routine well enough to predict she'd leave work, meet Daniel for dinner, and spend a few hours with him at the hotel before he returned home to his family. That morning, after she left for work, I packed my essentials. I loaded up my motorcycle, a reliable 2016 Honda Africa Twin, with everything I'd need for a few months on the road. Clothes, rain gear, an iPad, and some basic toiletries. My trusty Subaru Outback was loaded with a few additional items and parked in the garage, waiting for my dad to collect it later. The day felt surreal, like mourning the death of a loved one. But it wasn't a person I was grieving. It was my marriage. Sorting through the remnants of our life together felt like saying goodbye to a chapter that had already ended. even if I hadn't acknowledged it yet. I had a plan to ride my bike along the New England coast, through Maine and into Canada. From there, I'd wind through New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, take a ferry to Newfoundland, and continue across the country through the Rockies before eventually heading down the west coast. The journey would take months, giving me the time and distance I desperately needed to heal. I even toyed with the idea of joining Doctors Without Borders for a year or two. A complete reset seemed like the only way forward. But before I could start my journey, I had to close the chapter on Louise once and for all. I arrived at the hotel and walked straight to the front desk, asking to speak with Daniel Atcheson. The clerk rang his room, and after a few moments, Daniel answered. I took the phone, steadying my breath. "May I speak to Louise Shackley, please?" I asked calmly. There was a pause before Daniel responded, his voice laced with confusion. "There's no one here by that name. You must have the wrong number." I didn't let up. "Just tell her there's been a death in the family," I said, raising my voice slightly. "Tell her that her husband, Jack Shackley, is dead." Daniel stammered. "What? I don't understand." I cut him off, my voice now firm and deliberate. "Tell her her husband is dead," I repeated before slamming the receiver down. I handed the phone back to the receptionist, who looked at me with wide, bewildered eyes. I offered her a polite smile, thanked her, and walked out. My motorcycle was parked just outside. I strapped on my helmet, took a deep breath, and waited. Moments later, Louise burst out of the hotel, frantic and disheveled. She flagged down a cab and disappeared into the night, no doubt racing back to her apartment. She wouldn't find me there. I was already gone, riding toward freedom. Louise's perspective. "Oh my God!" I muttered, my heart racing. "Someone just called Daniel and said Jack is dead. What the hell is going on?" I scrambled to get dressed, my mind spinning. Who could have called? Was it real? I needed to get home now. I rushed out of the hotel, barely noticing the chill in the night air, and flagged down the first cab I saw. When I arrived at the apartment, everything felt wrong. The elevator ride to our floor dragged on like an eternity, and when I finally reached the door, my hands were trembling as I fumbled with the key. I burst inside, calling out for Jack. There was no answer. The apartment was eerily quiet. Then I saw it. An envelope with my name scrawled across the front sat on the kitchen table. I opened it with shaking hands, and inside, I found Jack's wedding ring and a single piece of paper. The note read, "Louise, you can consider me dead. Our marriage has been dead for a long time, and that's why I left. I took what I needed. The rest is yours. Do what you want with it. I've informed the management company that I won't be returning. You can decide whether to stay or move. The choice is yours. Don't look for me." It hit me like a punch to the gut. He knew. Jack knew everything. Jack's letter to Louise. "I'm on the road now, taking a break from work, life, and the chaos you've created with Daniel Atcheson. It's obvious that being married to me isn't something you value anymore. I hope you find happiness in the choices you've made. Take care, Jack. P.S. My attorney will be in touch soon with details you might find useful, or not. That's up to you." Louise's POV. I stared at the letter, stunned. What had I done? I never thought Jack would discover the truth about Daniel, let alone take such drastic action. To me, Daniel wasn't serious. He was just a way to fill the void left by Jack's relentless work schedule and our increasingly distant intimacy. I had been lonely, craving a connection, a spark, a man's touch. I assumed Jack would eventually slow down and we'd get back on track. Like every other couple, we'd have kids, buy a house, and become the family I had envisioned. But that dream was shattered now. Daniel was charming, and it was easy to fall into something with him. I convinced myself that meeting him once or twice a week wouldn't interfere with my marriage. It was a harmless escape, or so I thought. Now Jack was gone, and I didn't know how to fix this mess. I picked up my phone to call Jack, but the number had been disconnected. Desperation rising, I called his parents. His father answered, but his voice was cold and unyielding. "Jack has left, and as far as I'm concerned, you can go to hell." he said before hanging up. I looked around our apartment. It was emptier than I expected. Jack's closet was bare. A few books were missing from the shelves in the spare room, and black garbage bags sat on the kitchen floor. I opened one, finding items Jack had discarded. It was a punch to the gut. My chest felt tight as I sat at the table, staring at his wedding ring and the cold finality of his note. How had I been so reckless? As I sipped a glass of wine, my thoughts raced. There was no easy fix for this. I had destroyed our life together, and it was painfully clear I had underestimated Jack's resolve. Jack's perspective. That night, I didn't travel far. It was nearly 10 p.m. when I saw Louise dash out of the Hilton, hailing a cab like her life depended on it. She probably thought I was at the hospital, completely unaware of her betrayal. She'd planned to enjoy a few hours with Daniel before sneaking back home, but I'd put an end to that little fantasy. I started my bike, the Africa Twin, and its engine roared to life, a comforting sound amidst the turmoil. This machine, with its powerful 1,000 cubic centimeters engine and features like heated grips and crash bars, was built for adventures like the one I was about to embark on. Riding safely has always been my mantra. I've seen too many careless bikers end up in the ER with devastating injuries. My destination that night wasn't far, just across the river at a Holiday Inn Express. Physically and emotionally drained, all I wanted was a hot shower, a warm meal, and a bed. As I checked into my room, it struck me. This unassuming hotel was the starting line of my new life. The irony wasn't lost on me. Louise's POV. The next morning, I drove to Jack's parents' house, hoping for answers. His car was parked out front, so I rang the doorbell. When Miriam, his mother, answered and saw me, her face turned to stone. She slammed the door without a word. I rang the bell again, refusing to leave. Matthew, Jack's father, eventually answered. His expression was harsh. "What do you want?" he demanded. "Please, Matthew," I begged. "I need to talk to Jack. I need to explain." "You're too late. He left Albany last night. Even if I knew where he was, I wouldn't tell you," he replied coldly. "Matthew, I just need a chance. We can work this out," I pleaded, desperate. "You think he'll forgive you after what you've done? You had a 2-year affair, Louise. Get off our porch and don't come back," he said, slamming the door shut again. I sank onto the step, feeling utterly lost. When I rang the bell once more, Matthew cracked the door, glaring at me. I quickly said, "Just tell him I need to talk to him. Please ask him to call me." But his expression didn't soften. Defeated, I returned to our apartment and found a letter taped to the door. It was from Jack's attorney, Amanda Lawman. I tore it open, my heart pounding. The letter was devastatingly clear. I was no longer on Jack's health insurance. Our financial assets had been divided, and his life insurance beneficiaries had been updated to his parents. Jack wanted no further contact, and any communication would have to go through his attorney. Under state law, I could file for divorce on the grounds of abandonment after a year. Jack was done with me. The finality of it hit me like a freight train. 8 years together, 4 of them married, and I had destroyed it all. Jack's journey. A month later, I was in Newfoundland, finally feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I had spent over a week exploring the island, riding my bike through stunning landscapes and meeting warm, welcoming people. On the Avalon Peninsula, I encountered a moose that wandered into the road, curious but harmless. I kept my distance, waiting for it to return to the woods before continuing my ride. I had been warned about the high moose population, so I made sure to stick to daytime riding. In Petty Harbor, after visiting Cape Spear, the easternmost point of North America, I stopped for some ice cream. While there, I got a flat tire. Remarkably, 4 different people offered to help. It was a refreshing change from the cold indifference of Albany. A call to the Canadian Automobile Association, CAA, quickly resolved the issue. They sent a truck to transport my bike to a repair shop in St. Matthews, a nearby city with great hotels and restaurants. While my bike was being repaired and tuned up, I checked into a small, cozy hotel in the heart of the city. That evening, I took a long walk, reflecting on the freedom and clarity I'd gained in just a few weeks. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. Jack's POV. The hotel in St. Matthews was the perfect pit stop. It offered a comfortable space to unwind, do laundry, and recharge. Its cozy bar and restaurant were an added bonus, creating a welcoming atmosphere that felt like a small reprieve from everything I'd been through. At the motorcycle repair shop, I met Saren Flanagan, a fellow traveler on her own grand adventure. She was German, from Berlin, and her journey made mine seem tame by comparison. She was on her way to Morocco, planning to explore Africa on her bike. Saren worked for a travel company, and though her riding gear wasn't particularly flattering, it was clear she was stunning. She was about my age, tall at 5 feet 11 inches, with dark hair and striking features. She reminded me of that actress from The Mission Impossible movies, but her soft German accent added an entirely different layer of charm. As we talked about our experiences on the road, it was clear we shared a love for adventure. She was only in town for 3 more days, so I mustered the courage to ask her out to dinner. To my relief, she agreed, and we made plans to meet at a restaurant called the Salty Cod. It seemed like a fitting choice for Newfoundland. That night, we enjoyed great food, drinks, and conversation that flowed effortlessly. By morning, I woke to find Saren beside me, her dark hair cascading across the pillows. It had been the best night I'd had in years, maybe ever, and for the first time in a long while, I felt alive. We spent the following day together, talking about our travels, our dreams, and the lives we'd left behind. Saren's smile, her voice, her eyes, they drew me in, and I found myself captivated by her adventurous spirit. She had already covered nearly 40,000 kilometers on her journey and had plans to add another 20,000 before heading back to Germany. Her goal was to tour Africa's coastline, a plan far more ambitious than my route through North America. Inspired by her courage, I called my father to discuss the possibility of changing my plans. To my surprise, he encouraged me, reminding me to do what felt right for my own life. My father once joked that fathers are where dreams go to die, but in that moment he proved otherwise. He and my mom adored my older brother Matthew, who worked alongside Dad in their construction business. Matthew had a wife, Megan, and 3 kids, all of whom were spoiled by their grandparents. But that's a story for another time. With my father's blessing, I asked Saren if she'd be open to some company on her African adventure. I wasn't sure if she had someone waiting for her back home, but I decided to take the risk. He who dares wins, I thought. You're saying you want to come to Africa? She asked, a playful smile lighting up her face. Yes, I said confidently. You've inspired me. Africa sounds incredible, and it's definitely outside my comfort zone. But I think it's time I challenged myself and embraced the unknown. Saren's practical nature shone through. But your motorcycle is here. How would you get it to Africa? I called the repair shop to inquire about shipping options. The owner confirmed there was space in a shipping container for another bike, provided I signed some paperwork and paid the fee. With logistics sorted, we booked a flight from St. Matthews to Toronto, then to Paris with a short layover in Lisbon before finally landing in Casablanca. Before committing to traveling together, Saren made a few calls to confirm I was who I claimed to be. Her friend in Berlin had a husband in the police force, and they were able to verify my story. Saren learned that I was indeed a doctor on sabbatical from Albany, that my marriage had ended due to infidelity, and that I came from a well-respected family. Satisfied, she agreed to let me join her. Saren's POV. Meeting Jack in Newfoundland was unexpected but intriguing. I'd been traveling solo for months, documenting my journey for a book. I planned to write about motorcycle travel from a woman's perspective. While I valued the freedom of solo travel, it could be lonely. Jack seemed genuine, and his story checked out when my friend's husband, a police officer, ran a quick background check. He was a doctor, recently divorced, and taking a break to figure out his life. Knowing that, I felt more at ease about traveling with him. Having a doctor along was reassuring, especially for a journey as unpredictable as mine. Louise's POV. It was painfully clear Jack wanted nothing to do with me. His parents had shut me out, refusing to share his whereabouts or even acknowledge me. I didn't know whether to file for divorce myself or wait to see if he might eventually reconsider. Could our marriage be salvaged? Would he ever trust me again? To make things worse, Daniel had ended things abruptly. He feared his wife might have hired a private investigator and didn't want their affair used against him in a divorce. He also worried Jack might have told his wife, which left me feeling completely abandoned. The walls of the apartment seemed to close in on me. I had no social life to fall back on, no one to confide in. My colleagues often gathered on Friday nights, so I decided to start joining them. I needed to get out, to feel something other than this oppressive loneliness. Jack's POV. Casablanca was like nothing I'd ever experienced. A vibrant mix of old and new, bustling with life and culture. With a population of 4 million, the city was Morocco's main port, perched on the North African coast of the Atlantic. Saren and I stayed in a budget hotel while waiting for the ship carrying our motorcycles, which was delayed by 2 days due to bad weather. In the meantime, she drove me around to get the gear I'd need for the African leg of our journey. We spent our days exploring the city, trying new foods, and soaking up the local culture. Some nights were unforgettable, filled with laughter and connection. Others were quieter, weighed down by the unresolved emotions I still carried from my past. But with Saren by my side, I felt like I was finally moving forward. Louise's POV. 2 months had passed, and I hadn't heard a word from Jack. The silence was deafening. It was clear he wanted to sever all ties, but I couldn't stop questioning where it had all gone wrong. Yes, Jack worked long hours, but that wasn't the whole story. I needed him too, and he hadn't been there for me. Was I selfish? Maybe. But I had needs, and now, with Jack gone, I felt like I was drowning in regret. Daniel stopped by the bank yesterday, looking as smug as ever. He claimed his wife was no longer suspicious, so he thought we could start seeing each other again. When I told him Jack had left me, he suggested we save on hotel bills and use my apartment instead. The nerve of him, yet I couldn't help but consider it. The truth is, I need a man soon, or I'll lose my mind. I had hoped it would be Jack, but with him gone, I might have to settle for Daniel again. Jack's POV. Morocco is breathtaking, and so is Saren. The more I get to know her, the more I find myself drawn to her. She's not just gorgeous, though she's intelligent, resourceful, and an incredible motorcycle rider. Her practicality and sense of adventure make her someone I deeply admire. Saren shared bits of her past with me. Back home in Berlin, she had a longtime partner, a common-law husband by German standards, but their relationship ended when he cheated. She didn't hesitate to kick him out, literally throwing his belongings off the balcony. Her decisiveness impressed me. She moved on with her life, choosing to start anew in Casablanca. I've picked up a lot from Saren, not just about travel but also about resilience. She's taught me how to prepare for long rides, and I've outfitted my bike with everything I'll need for these unfamiliar terrains. I now carry extra gasoline, oil, plenty of water, tools for repairs, and a small gas stove for camping. My riding gear is top-notch, and my bike is equipped with metal engine guards, extra LED lights, and a satellite-connected GPS. The new gear came in handy as we explored Morocco. When we arrived, I wasn't ready for the drastic change in diet, and let's just say I had to stay close to a bathroom for a few days. Saren found it hilarious, being more accustomed to adventurous eating. She helped me through it, even reminding me to hydrate and keep some electrolyte pills on hand. Before long, I adjusted and was back on my feet. A letter from my attorney arrived, letting me know Louise hadn't reached out or tried to contest anything. I suppose she's either accepted the end of our marriage or is still figuring out her next move. Frankly, I don't care. I've moved on, and this journey is exactly what I need to rediscover myself. Saren and I left Casablanca, heading south toward Marrakesh, opting for a scenic route through El Jadida. The coastal city was beautiful, and we spent the night there before moving on to El Walidia, a charming town with cooler weather that made the journey more bearable. Saren's linguistic skills have been invaluable. She's fluent in German, English, French, Spanish, and even speaks some Arabic. Watching her seamlessly switch between languages as we navigated different towns has been nothing short of amazing. And that German accent of hers? It's incredibly appealing. Our trip to Marrakesh took 5 days and over 1,300 kilometers, and every moment felt like a new adventure. We passed through Safi and Essaouira before heading inland. Marrakesh, with its blend of ancient and modern culture, captivated us. We found an affordable hotel with secure bike parking and decided to stay for 3 days to explore. Saren's bike, a BMW F800 GS, was a marvel of engineering, designed for long-distance travel. I've considered upgrading to something similar in the future, but for now, my trusty Africa Twin is holding its own. Louise's POV. It's been over 2 months, and there's still no word from Jack or anyone close to him. Every time I call his family, they shut me out. His attorney only asks if I'm filing for divorce or have a letter for him, but I haven't written one. I'm not ready to give up entirely. Jack was a great husband, and he'd make an incredible father if we ever had children. But that dream seems impossible now. In the meantime, I've had a few one-night stands. Does that make me a bad person? Probably. But Jack left without so much as a text or email to let me know what he's doing or when. If he's coming back. Part of me just wants to hear his voice again. Jack's POV. Traveling through Africa has been a revelation. The culture, the terrain, the people. It's all so different from the life I left behind, yet strangely familiar. At their core, people here want the same things: to care for their families, provide food and shelter, and build a better future for their children. Morocco, in particular, stands out as a place of relative stability compared to many other nations on the continent. The people are warm and welcoming, and traveling with Saren has made the experience even more enriching. She's opened my eyes to the thrill of pushing boundaries and embracing the unknown. I've grown up in the safety and comfort of New York, surrounded by a loving family, but not everyone has that privilege. This journey has taught me that pride in one's home and a sense of community are universal, regardless of circumstances. With Saren by my side, I feel like I'm rediscovering what it means to live. She's a passionate and adventurous soul, living on the edge but always grounded by common sense. She's an incredible lover, too wild, caring, and full of fire. I've realized that I don't want to return to my old life in Albany. The hospital, the routines, the reminders of Louise. It's all part of a chapter I'm ready to leave behind. Saren's POV. Traveling with Jack through Africa has been an absolute delight. He's constantly amazed by the differences between life here and in the US, and it's refreshing to see the world through his eyes. Jack is still processing the betrayal he endured, and I can see how much it affected him. He worked so hard to build a life with someone who was supposed to stand by him, only to be let down. I don't know Louise, but from what I've heard, she made her choices, and those choices drove him away. I'm not here to steal anyone's husband. Jack seems more than ready to leave that part of his life behind. But I can't deny that being with him has been incredible. As our journey continues, I find myself dreading the inevitable goodbye when he returns to his old life. I have commitments of my own, including a publishing deal for a guidebook on motorcycle travel for women. It's a project I'm passionate about, even if it won't make me rich. For now, I'm focusing on the present, enjoying every moment of this adventure with Jack. Jack and I set off from Marrakesh on an ambitious ride to Layoun, a sprawling 900 kilometers journey along Morocco's dramatic coastline. The landscape was otherworldly. Endless stretches of dust and wide open spaces that were as humbling as they were beautiful. Jack was in awe but also cautious. This environment demanded respect. His American passport often puzzled border guards, who were more accustomed to Europeans. One officer asked Jack why he left America. He simply smiled and pointed at me, earning a knowing laugh from the officer. On our way, we camped in isolated areas, far from the road to avoid unwanted attention. The first night, Jack barely slept, startled by every sound in the still desert night. By the second night, exhaustion overpowered him, and he managed to get some rest. In the mornings, we'd perform basic ablutions and share coffee brewed on our tiny stove before continuing the journey. Survival here required preparation. Gasoline, water, and food were priorities, and we always stocked up whenever possible. The ride through Western Sahara and Mauritania was like stepping onto another planet. The terrain was stark, brutal, and breathtakingly beautiful all at once. Jack, still adjusting to this alien environment, leaned heavily on me for insights about the region. Through our helmet communication system, I provided context and history, drawing from my extensive research as a travel magazine editor. The cultural and environmental contrasts were overwhelming for him at first, but he adapted quickly. Did I mention Jack is completely smitten with my accent? He jokingly said he'd listen to me read the Berlin phone book just to hear me speak. That flattery earned him a laugh, but I could tell he meant it. Jack's POV. The journey from Leon to Dakar was another level of endurance. Over 1,800 kilometers in the heat and dust tested both our stamina and our bikes. Saren was a constant reminder to stay hydrated, always nagging me like a stern coach. My camelback held 4 liters of water, which I drained daily, and I needed even more at our rest stops. At one point, we had to pull over on the side of the road for nature's call, and when Saren had to squat, I couldn't resist snapping a photo. She chased me down, snatched the phone, and we ended up laughing like kids. Those moments of levity kept us sane through the grueling conditions. The remoteness of Western Sahara meant we carried extra fuel and used it more than once. My Africa Twin's larger engine guzzled gas compared to Saren's BMW, so I decided I'd need an auxiliary tank for future trips. Mechanical issues were inevitable, and when my bike broke down, we spent 3 hours on roadside repairs. It was frustrating, but Saren's practical, calm demeanor kept us moving forward. Sleeping in the desert was a challenge, but the intimacy we shared in our tiny tent made the discomfort worthwhile. There's something unforgettable about making love under a canopy of stars, surrounded by nothing but sand and silence. Crossing the Senegalese border at Diama was a relatively smooth process, thanks to tips we'd received from other bikers. St. Louis was the first city we encountered, and the stark contrast between its poverty-stricken outskirts and its wealthier neighborhoods was striking. We stayed in a secure, budget-friendly hotel near a government building, enjoying 2 days of well-earned rest. During those 2 days, we barely left our room, indulging in food, laughter, and the hotel pool when we finally ventured outside. For $50 a night, we enjoyed amenities that would cost 4 times as much back home. Checking my email with the hotel's Wi-Fi, I found messages from my parents asking how I was and a note from my attorney. Louise had written to ask where I was and when I'd return. I instructed my parents and lawyer to keep my location private. Louise hadn't filed for divorce yet, but I was ready to do it myself if she didn't. My future lay ahead, not behind, and right now I was having the time of my life. Saren's POV. After 2 amazing days in St. Louis, we hit the road for Dakar. The trip, just 300 kilometers, promised to be an easier ride, until disaster struck. A scooter carrying a family of 5 and a propane tank hit a pothole and flipped right in front of a bus, causing a chain reaction. The bus swerved, hit a truck, and toppled onto its side. Jack and I pulled our bikes over, rushed to the scene, and immediately assessed the chaos. Jack ran to the front of the bus, where the family from the scooter lay scattered. The father was pinned under the wreckage. The children and mother were unconscious with the propane tank precariously close. Without hesitation, Jack took charge, focusing on the mother. "Saren, check the kids and hand me the first aid kits," he yelled, his voice steady despite the urgency. I handed him the kits and did as he asked, keeping the children calm while assessing their injuries. Locals arrived to help, but it became clear that lifting the bus would require more manpower and tools. Jack kept asking for an ambulance, but the police who arrived merely directed traffic and looked confused. Finally, 2 ambulances arrived, and the family was transported to the hospital. Exhausted, Jack and I sat by the roadside, sipping water and catching our breath. A police officer approached, intrigued by Jack's composure and skill. When he learned Jack was a doctor, he insisted we follow him to the hospital to ensure the family received proper care. Jack's POV. The hospital in St. Louis was a far cry from what I was used to back in Albany, but it was clean, functional, and staffed by professionals doing their best with limited resources. The father, once freed from the bus wreckage, was in critical condition but alive. The mother regained consciousness, and the children's injuries were stabilized. I stayed by their side, helping where I could. Saren was a rock, keeping everyone calm and organized, and I couldn't have done it without her. The experience was a stark reminder of the challenges people face in regions like this. It also reaffirmed my decision to leave my old life behind. Here, I felt useful, needed, and alive in a way I hadn't in years. Saren's POV. At the hospital, Jack quickly realized the staff was overwhelmed. When the nurse informed him there wasn't room for another patient, he didn't hesitate. He began treating the injured children from the accident himself. With calm precision, he stitched up cuts and tended to wounds, guiding me through the process so I could assist him. I was nervous at first, and used to blood and the sterile smell of medical work, but Jack's steady demeanor was reassuring. He made everything seem manageable even as we worked for hours. Watching Jack in action, I was reminded of how incredible he is under pressure. Most people flee from danger, but Jack charges toward it, instinctively taking control. I almost forgot he was a doctor until I saw him at the accident scene, barking instructions and saving lives. We ended up staying another 3 days in St. Louis. Jack spent nearly all his time at the hospital, tending to patients from the crash and others who had heard rumors about the foreign doctor and seized the rare opportunity to see one. He worked tirelessly, going over 30 hours without a break. Meanwhile, I returned to the hotel to rest and clean up, knowing he would need every ounce of energy for the road ahead. Jack's POV. Leaving St. Louis was bittersweet. The people there wouldn't have regular access to a doctor again, and it felt like we were abandoning them. But there were new horizons ahead, and we pushed south toward Dakar. Dakar is unlike any city I've seen. The capital of Senegal, it buzzes with energy and stark contrasts. Gleaming Mercedes-Benz cars and rickety scooters weave through chaotic traffic, a visual representation of the city's wealth disparity. But everyone here seems focused on survival, working to feed their families and keep a roof over their heads. I insisted on booking a hotel on the beach, needing a proper vacation after our grueling days in the desert. Saren and I had been splitting costs for most of the trip, but I knew her funds were tighter than mine, so I covered this one. We spent 3 blissful days enjoying the ocean, exploring Dakar, and being tourists. One night, Saren told me that traveling with me had made her incredibly happy. I couldn't help but smile as I told her she was quietly saving my life. Her adventurous spirit had given me a new lease on life, and I didn't know how to thank her enough. Reality, however, is relentless. Checking my email, I found a message from Dr. Megan Hogarth, the chief administrator at Albany General Hospital. Dr. Jack Shackley, we hope you've enjoyed your leave and are rested. Unfortunately, due to a coworker's illness, you must return by the 1st of next month. Please contact me immediately. Dr. Megan Hogarth, Chief Administrator. All good things must end, and it seemed my adventure was no exception. For now, I decided to ignore the email and keep going. Saren's POV. The journey south from Dakar loomed large in my mind. It was going to be challenging and dangerous, especially with Jack needing to return to the U.S. We discussed our next steps, and I suggested an ambitious detour, Namibia. Riding from Windhoek to Cape Town seemed like the perfect way to end our time together. In Dakar, we arranged for our motorcycles to be shipped by air. 2 days later, we boarded a cargo plane bound for Windhoek. The flight was an adventure in itself. The plane was old, the pilots looked like teenagers, and turbulent winds made for a nerve-wracking journey. When we finally landed and saw our bikes waiting for us, I let out a sigh of relief. The ride south to Cape Town took 5 days, filled with stunning landscapes and unforgettable moments. Jack and I grew even closer, and the nights we spent together were filled with passion. I realized I had fallen deeply in love with him. He wasn't just a partner on this trip, he was the hero of my story. But reality pulled us back. My work commitments in Berlin loomed large, with a book to write, videos to edit, and a publisher breathing down my neck. On our final night together, we returned our bikes. Mine went into storage, and Jack's was shipped back to the U.S. We kissed goodbye at Frankfurt Airport, and I could see the sadness in his eyes. As he whispered that he loved me, I knew this wasn't the last time I'd see him. Jack's POV. Returning to Albany felt surreal. My brother Matthew greeted me in a hotel lobby, looking thrilled. "Holy hell, bro, you're looking good. Where have you been?" "Overseas," I replied vaguely. "How'd you know I was here?" "I've got a client meeting here. Mom and Dad mentioned you were taking a break from work and Louise, but they didn't say where. So, what's the deal with Louise?" "It's a long story. I'll fill you in at dinner tonight," I said. "A home-cooked meal sounds great." After chatting briefly, I told Matthew I needed to head to the hospital to see my boss. Matthew, always the family networker, immediately started calling everyone. Probably our parents and his wife, Megan, to announce my return. It was a short walk to the hospital, and the crisp morning air reminded me of everything I had left behind. Passing by the building where Louise worked felt strange, but I kept going. Dr. Hogarth greeted me warmly, expressing relief at my return. She mentioned receiving a letter from the Senegalese government, via the U.S. State Department, thanking me for my help in St. Louis. She was curious about the incident, and I described the bizarre sight of a family of 5 on a scooter with a propane tank. She found it as surreal as I did. After being briefed on my new schedule, I learned I'd be working 12-hour shifts for the next 6 days. I knew they could easily stretch to 18 when emergencies arose. That evening, I joined Matthew and Megan for dinner. As soon as I walked in, Megan hugged me tightly. "Jack, how are you? We've all missed you." "I'm good. Thanks for asking," I replied, handing small gifts to their kids, who scampered off to play. Megan wasted no time. "All right, let's get to the main topic. What happened between you and Louise? Why did you leave?" I chuckled, deflecting. "Good to see you too, Megan. A beer would be great." Matthew took the hint and fetched 3 bottles from the kitchen. As they stared expectantly, I sighed and began. "I suppose you want the full story. What did Mom and Dad tell you?" Megan crossed her arms, clearly unimpressed with my evasiveness. "They haven't told us anything," Megan said, her tone tinged with frustration. "I even tried reaching out to Louise, but she wouldn't reveal much. All we know is that you took a break from work and vanished on your own. So what's going on?" Over the next half hour, I recounted the past 5 months. I left out some of the grittier details, like the investigator's full report, feeling it unnecessary to share every sordid revelation about Louise's betrayal. The focus was on my travels, especially my time in Africa, which naturally led to questions about Saren. I told them a bit about her, enough to satisfy their curiosity, but kept the more personal aspects to myself. Dinner was served, accompanied by more beer, and I answered their questions about life abroad. Afterward, I mentioned my plan to find a temporary place to live while sorting out the divorce and deciding on my next steps. The trip with Saren had shifted my perspective on life, and the thought of returning to hospital work and pretending everything was fine seemed intolerable. Being back in Albany was a stark reminder of my failed marriage. Thinking about Louise left a bitter taste in my mouth. She had deceived me for so long, and I vowed never to let that happen again. My travels had shown me that good, honest women exist, women with morals and integrity who wouldn't lie or betray their partners. If Louise had simply told me she didn't want to be married anymore, we could have ended things amicably. Instead, she chose to hide and deceive. I took an Uber back to my hotel that night, relieved to have some closure with my family. The next morning, I began looking for a new apartment. Louise's POV. A coworker told me Jack was back in town. Apparently, someone at the hospital had spotted him. My attempts to reach out to his parents were met with the same cold response as always. "Back off." Desperate, I decided to wait outside the hospital, hoping to see him. For 4 nights, I parked near the entrance, watching the steady stream of ambulances and staff. On the second night, I needed to use the restroom and went inside. A security guard kindly directed me, but when I asked about Jack, he said doctors' names weren't given out without an appointment. Frustrated, I left. On the 4th night, I finally saw him. My heart raced as he walked from the parking lot to the entrance. I almost called out, but he disappeared inside before I could muster the courage. At least now I knew he was back. Jack's POV. Returning to the ER was like stepping back into a chaotic symphony. Gunshot wounds, car accidents, stabbings, it was all familiar, yet it felt alien after my time abroad. Heart attacks and strokes were just as common, stark reminders of the country's struggle with obesity. In Africa, health challenges were different. People had less, ate better, and moved more. 2 weeks after returning, I met with my attorney to finalize the divorce details. There wasn't much to divide. No kids, minimal property, so I told her Louise could keep everything in the apartment. I didn't want any ties to that life anymore. My attorney had already prepared the paperwork, and I instructed her to file it immediately. To my surprise, Louise hadn't initiated the divorce herself. I assumed she'd want to move on quickly, given her affair. Regardless, the process was now underway, and I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Life outside the hospital was lonely. My motorcycle was still en route from Africa, so I decided to buy another one. After some research, I settled on a KTM 890 Adventure R, perfect for both city streets and rugged trails. It wasn't cheap, but it felt like an investment in my newfound freedom. Louise's POV. When I got home, a man in a suit was waiting outside my building. "Louise Shackley?" he asked, checking his phone. "Yes. Who are you?" He handed me a large envelope. "You've been served," he said curtly. Before I could respond, he stepped back, snapped a photo of me holding the papers, and walked away. I knew this was coming, but seeing it in black and white still stung. Jack's POV. My attorney emailed to confirm that Louise had been served. If she delayed, we'd still meet the legal requirements for an uncontested divorce within 6 months. It was a straightforward process, but it marked the definitive end of a chapter one no longer wanted to revisit. That night, my doorbell buzzed. Louise's POV. I had followed Jack 2 nights ago after seeing him leave the hospital. He didn't go far. Just a few blocks from our old place, now solely mine. Knowing where he lived was one thing. Finding the courage to confront him was another. After days of deliberation, I put on an outfit I knew he liked. Skinny jeans, high heels, and a sleeveless white blouse. My hair was in a ponytail, simple but elegant, just the way he preferred. I grabbed his favorite beer and a bottle of Chardonnay for myself, hoping to break the ice. When I pressed the buzzer for his apartment, my heart pounded. "Hi, Jack. Is that you?" "Who's this?" he asked, his voice distant. "It's me, Louise. Your wife." Silence. "Can I come up?" I asked tentatively. The pause felt like an eternity. Then the buzzer sounded. I hurried inside, afraid he might change his mind. Taking the elevator to his floor, my legs felt unsteady. When I reached his door, I knocked softly, holding my breath. Jack's POV. When the intercom buzzed, I assumed it was another solicitor or someone selling cookies. I wasn't expecting Louise. The moment I heard her voice, a flood of emotions rushed through me. Anger, confusion, and something I couldn't quite name. Against my better judgment, I let her in. In the few minutes it took for her to reach my door, my mind raced with questions. Why was she here? What did she want? I reminded myself that I had moved on. I was in a better place now. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. When I opened the door, there she was, Louise. She looked good, though there were signs of weariness on her face. The woman who was still, technically, my wife stood there, hesitant. I opened the door wider, gesturing for her to come in. "Hi, Louise. What brings you here tonight?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Hi, Jack. I wanted to talk. You've been hard to reach and even harder to find," she said, her voice uncertain. I walked down the hallway to the kitchen, noticing the bottle of wine in her bag. Pulling a glass from the cabinet, I set it on the counter and motioned for her to hand me the bottle. It had a screw cap, so I opened it and poured her a glass. She then offered me a can of IPA, but I declined. "No thanks. I'm on hospital duty tonight," I said, pouring myself a glass of Diet Coke instead. I pointed to the table. "Let's sit here," I said firmly. The table felt more appropriate for the conversation we needed to have. Not the couch where a false sense of friendliness might creep in. Louise wasted no time with small talk, diving straight into the matter. Louise's POV. Jack looked more serious than I'd ever seen him, and it twisted my stomach into knots. You terrified me when you called the hotel and told Daniel I was dead, I said, my voice trembling. He didn't recognize your voice. When I got home and found your note and wedding ring, I was in shock. I pulled his gold wedding ring out of my bag and placed it on the table. He stared at it like it was something venomous, refusing to touch it. I tried reaching out to your family, but they wouldn't even give me the time of day. Your father kept telling me to go to hell, and I suppose I deserved it. Since you left, my life has been a nightmare, I said, hoping for some semblance of empathy. Jack didn't miss a beat. What did you expect me to do, Louise? I found out you were messing around with Daniel Atcheson for almost 2 years. Did you think I'd just sit quietly and let it slide? Did you think I was that much of a fool? Actually, I know you did. It's not like that, I protested weakly. Then what was it like? He shot back, his voice sharp and unforgiving. I was lonely, I admitted. You were always at the hospital, never home. And when you were home, you were too exhausted to spend time with me. So that justified cheating on me? Jack countered. Ignoring our marriage was acceptable? Why couldn't you just tell me you wanted out? Why lie to me for so long? His voice was filled with hurt and anger, his eyes fixed on the table. He couldn't even look at me. Jack's POV. I took a long sip of my drink to steady myself before asking, Did you sign the divorce papers? No, she said quietly. I don't want a divorce. I want us to be a family again. I'm still your wife, Jack. I want to be your wife and the mother of your children. I laughed bitterly. You've got to be kidding me. Are you completely delusional? I still love you, she insisted, her voice trembling. I'm not going to do anything to jeopardize that. I want us to live together again, to be lovers again. I want us to have the family we dreamed of. I stared at her in disbelief. Jesus, Louise, you're delusional. I'm not going to be your husband for a day longer than necessary. My lawyer is ready to move forward. In New York, it's enough if we've lived apart for a year, or 6 months if the marriage is irretrievably broken. And you've done a stellar job of making it irretrievably broken. This is over. We are over. What will it take for you to understand that? Louise reached across the table, desperation etched on her face. Jack, we can make this work. I know we can. No, we can't, I said firmly, standing up. You destroyed any chance of that when you chose to sleep with another man. This relationship is beyond repair. It's time to move on, Louise. It's over. Go back to your life. I stood, signaling that the conversation had ended. Louise's POV. I drained the last of my wine and stood, trying to muster courage. If I could just touch him, remind him of what we once had, maybe there was still a chance. I stepped close, taking his hand and pulling him toward me. I kissed him on the lips, hoping for a spark, a flicker of connection. For a moment he froze. Then he pulled away, his expression unreadable. Don't forget to take this, he said coldly, pointing to his wedding ring on the table. I slipped it back into my bag and left his apartment. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer as I walked to my car. This was the end. Jack was gone. The life we had, the dreams we shared, it was all over. I loved him, but I had thrown it all away for something meaningless. Daniel wasn't worth it. He got what he wanted, and I lost everything. I had no choice now but to sign the divorce papers and let Jack go. Jack's POV. Louise's stunt at the door was the final nail in the coffin. She thought a kiss could erase years of lies and betrayal. I needed a long, hot shower to wash the memory of her off me. Afterward, I grabbed a beer and tried to focus on anything but the mess she had created. Saren's POV. Life in Berlin has been hectic. Editing hours of video and dubbing everything in both English and German is a monumental task. Closed captioning is equally exhausting, but the project is progressing. The past month has flown by. I've sent Jack a few emails with short clips and photos from our Africa trip. He looked great in the videos, even in the one where he crashed his motorcycle. We laughed about it, especially the part where a herd of cows almost derailed him. Before we went to Africa, I had my friend's husband, who works for the government, run a background check on Jack. I needed to know he was who he said he was, and thankfully he was genuine. Recently, I asked for another update. A week later, my friend told me Jack was back in Albany, working in the ER, and his lawyer had filed for divorce. That was a relief. He deserved to move on. I have some important news to share with him, but first, I need to take care of a few things back in America. I hope he'll be as excited about it as I am. Jack's POV. Yay! I'm divorced, I said aloud, holding the finalized papers in my hands. It was official. Louise and I were no longer married. The relief was overwhelming. I finally felt free, ready to move on with my life. Saren had been a constant presence, sending emails and videos that brought back memories of our incredible trip. Her updates were a bright spot in my days. She mentioned she had an announcement for me, but I had no idea what it could be. Whatever it was, I was looking forward to hearing from her. For the first time in a long time, I felt like my life was truly my own. I assumed Saren's important news was about her book or videos. That seemed logical, given how passionate she was about her work. Saren's POV. I needed to tell Jack my news, but now wasn't the right time. Not while he was still untangling himself emotionally from his ex-wife. I wanted his full attention, focused on me and our connection, not lingering frustration over Louise. A little more time wouldn't hurt. Jack's POV. It had been a week since my divorce was finalized, and now I found myself at Albany International Airport, preparing for a 15-hour journey to Berlin. First stop, O'Hare in Chicago, then Heathrow in London, and finally Berlin-Brandenburg. I had to see Saren. It had been nearly 2 months since we'd parted ways after our journey through Africa, and I needed to know if what we shared was still there. If not, I'd go back to Albany and figure out my next move. Perhaps it would involve joining Doctors Without Borders. The pay wasn't great, but the work would be fulfilling. After landing in Berlin and breezing through customs, I grabbed my bag and hailed a cab to my hotel in Alexanderplatz. The Parkview Hotel was a far cry from the simple accommodations Saren and I had grown accustomed to in Africa, but it felt like a treat after the long flight. After a quick shower and a bite to eat, I set out to find Saren's office. Google Maps made the task easy enough, and it turned out her workplace was only a 15-minute walk from my hotel. As I made my way there, I tried to temper my expectations. Showing up unannounced could go either way. Either she'd be thrilled to see me, or she'd wonder why I hadn't given her a heads up. When I arrived, I found her name on the building directory and took the elevator up. At the reception desk, a young woman greeted me in German. I responded with a smile, asking if I could see Saren Brown. Her expression shifted, her eyebrows shooting up in recognition. She made a quick phone call, then said, "Saren or someone else will be here in a minute. Please have a seat." I sat down in a plush leather chair, noticing her whispering into the phone again. I thought I caught the word American a few times. Women passing by glanced at me curiously, making me feel oddly self-conscious. Did they do this for every visitor, or was I some kind of anomaly? Before I could dwell on it, a striking woman approached me. "Dr. Shackley?" she asked. I nodded, and she said, "Follow me, please." Her tight skirt and clicking heels on the polished granite floor made it easy to follow her through the sleek corridors of glass and steel. I realized they must have known more about me than I anticipated. After all, I'd introduced myself simply as Jack Shackley, not Dr. Shackley. As we walked, I checked my fly discreetly, suddenly aware of the attention I was drawing. Just as I began wondering if they'd made an announcement about a strange American in the building, Saren rounded a corner. Her face lit up with a radiant smile as she ran the last few steps toward me, throwing her arms around my neck and kissing me on the lips. "Jack, when did you get to Berlin?" she exclaimed. "A few hours ago," I replied, grinning. "I checked into my hotel and cleaned up first. I didn't want to look like a vagrant and get thrown out by security." She laughed, taking my hand and leading me to her editing room. "Come on. I want to show you what I've been working on," she said. Saren looked entirely different from how I remembered her in Africa. She wore a flowing black skirt and a crisp white blouse, her heels clicking softly on the floor. The professional look suited her, though I couldn't help but remember her in her motorcycle gear, or better yet, completely naked. My best memories were split between those moments and the breathtaking landscapes we explored together. The naked ones definitely held the edge. As we talked about her book and videos, she explained that some footage would go on YouTube, while the rest would be exclusive to the publisher's site. "Do you have time for dinner?" I asked. "I'd love to catch up properly and tell you about what's been going on with me." "I do," she replied, smiling. "How long are you in Berlin?" 3 days, but I can extend my stay if needed." "What do you have in mind?" Saren's response surprised me. "I want you to meet my family. I've told them so much about you, and they're excited to meet you." "Oh," I said, caught off guard. "I suppose I can do that. But first, I need food, and I'd really like to try a proper German beer. I can leave and meet you after you're off work." "No, you won't," she said firmly. "I'm leaving now with you. It's been months since I've seen you, and I have important news to share." Saren's POV. As we left the building, people turned to watch us, their curiosity palpable. I held Jack's hand, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. Walking back to his hotel, I couldn't help but wonder if Jack had thought much about our time together in Africa. Did he miss me as much as I missed him? I hoped so, because I had something life-changing to tell him. When we reached his room, I barely gave him time to close the door before pulling him into a kiss. Jack's touch was both familiar and thrillingly new, and I realized just how much I'd missed him. He made me feel alive in a way no one else ever had. Jack's POV. For months, it felt like I'd been holding my breath. Now, with Saren in my arms, I could finally exhale. She was perfect to me in every way. Just days ago, I'd been tethered to the nightmare of my marriage. But now, here I was, with a woman who reignited my passion for life. I didn't want this to end. As we lay together afterward, I turned to Saren and asked softly, "So, what's the important news?" She smiled mysteriously, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You'll find out soon enough," she said. Jack's POV. By the time we surfaced from the cocoon of the hotel room, it was nearly 9 p.m. After a quick shower, we decided to stay at the hotel restaurant for dinner. It offered excellent food, and finding good beer in Germany was hardly a challenge. Saren surprised me by ordering a Diet Coke instead of her usual beer. I couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. "Diet Coke? Not beer?" She smiled. "I'm just not in the mood for it tonight." As we ate, I decided to ask about her family. "So, why does your family want to meet me?" "I've told them all about you," she replied. "They're very curious about our travels in Africa, and, of course, they're eager to meet someone from the United States. My parents have visited the U.S. a few times to see my aunt in Florida. She lives near Tampa, loves the beach, and claims it helps with her arthritis." Her laugh was infectious, and I couldn't help but smile as she continued. "We can take the train to my parents' house tomorrow if you want. It's about a 6-hour ride." "Where do they live?" "In the South. My dad was an engineer for Volkswagen working on production systems. He's retired now but loves to talk about it. My mom was an accountant before she retired. I'll call them tonight to let them know we're coming." I decided to go with the flow, even if the prospect of meeting her parents felt a bit overwhelming. As we lingered over dinner, Saren turned the conversation back to me. "So, you're now officially a free man," she said with a knowing smile. I grinned. "I am. I've got the paperwork to prove it." Reaching into my pocket, I unfolded the document and placed it on the table. "Here it is. Freedom, in black and white." She examined the paper, her eyes twinkling. "Congratulations. How does it feel?" "It feels good. It was inevitable once I found out she'd been cheating for nearly 2 years. If she'd wanted to stay married, she wouldn't have done what she did for so long," I said, shrugging before taking a sip of beer. "So, what's next for you?" she asked, her tone carrying a hint of curiosity and something more. Her question made me pause. There was no doubt in my mind that meeting her family wasn't just a casual introduction. It felt like a step towards something significant. For months, we'd shared a bond deeper than what most couples achieve after years together. Still, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that I was being evaluated. "I'm not sure how much longer I want to stay in Albany," I admitted. "The hospital wants me back, and the pay's good, but there's too much history there. I need a fresh start, maybe explore another part of the world. And you've given me the travel bug, you know. This is mostly your fault. She laughed. Well, I'm glad I could be such a bad influence. Jack's POV. The next morning, we went to Saren's apartment so she could pack a few things. After making a few calls to confirm plans with her parents, we took a cab to the train station. I'd always loved European trains. They ran on time, were easy to navigate, and lacked the intense security of airports. Our journey south was comfortable, and when we arrived, Saren's parents greeted us warmly. Her father, Thomas, was tall and imposing, while her mother, Elizabeth, had a kind smile that mirrored Saren's. It didn't take long to see the resemblance between mother and daughter. They had the same expressive eyes and hair, though Saren had inherited her father's strong features. Thomas led us to his car, a meticulously maintained Passat station wagon, and we drove to their home. The house was old but immaculate, with a completely renovated interior featuring sleek appliances and modern comforts. I complimented Thomas on the craftsmanship. My father's a builder, and I think he'd approve of the work you've done here. The compliment seemed to puff him up with pride. He offered me a beer as we settled into the living room, where Saren brought drinks for everyone. Beer for Thomas and me, red wine for Elizabeth, and water for herself. As we sipped our drinks, I could feel her parents' curiosity pressing in. Their looks practically screamed, "Tell us about yourself." To break the tension, I decided to shift the focus to them. So, Saren tells me you worked for Volkswagen, I said, turning to Thomas. That was all the encouragement he needed. He launched into a detailed explanation of his work as an engineer, including the intricacies of production systems and the quality of German manufacturing. I made sure to listen intently, nodding and asking questions to show my interest. Elizabeth was more reserved, but when the topic turned to her accounting career, she shared her experiences working for a large firm before retiring. She and Thomas had big plans to travel, especially to warmer climates like Spain or Greece. They dreamed of buying a vacation home on the coast to escape Germany's harsh winters. The conversation felt surprisingly familiar, reminding me of my own family. My parents had bought a van to travel across the U.S., spoiling their grandchildren at every stop. They had hoped I'd add to the family brood, but that dream had died along with my marriage. Dinner was a feast, and Thomas's enthusiasm for German engineering didn't wane as the night went on. He proudly told me he was the reason Saren had gotten into motorcycling, and that he still owned a BMW 1200 in the garage. He planned to show it to me tomorrow, along with a smaller bike he used for local trips. Despite his intense scrutiny, I appreciated Thomas's passion for life and the way he doted on his family. Elizabeth, though quieter, had a sharp wit and a warmth that made me feel welcome. When bedtime rolled around, I was fully prepared to be relegated to a separate room from Saren. To my surprise, Elizabeth had set out fresh towels for both of us in the same room. As Saren and I settled into bed, I decided to keep things respectful and left my underwear on. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being evaluated, and the last thing I wanted was to give her parents a reason to disapprove. Jack's POV. Saren noticed my hesitation as I climbed into bed wearing boxers, something I rarely did. "Why are you doing that?" she asked, pointing at them with a playful smirk. "We're at your parents' house," I explained. "It doesn't feel right to get naked here." She chuckled softly and leaned in close. "Take them off. I haven't seen you in months, and I want you clothes." Her whispered words melted my resolve. As I slid them off, I couldn't resist teasing her. "How long?" Saren tilted her head, confused. "How long what? How many weeks?" I repeated. "You know I'm a doctor, right? I know what a pregnant woman looks like. There's a small bump forming, so I'm guessing about 3, maybe 3.5 months. Saren froze for a moment before a smile broke across her face. She got up, went to her bag, and returned with a plastic pregnancy test showing 2 unmistakable blue stripes. My heart stopped as the realization hit me. I was going to be a father. She explained that she'd seen a doctor in Berlin about a month ago and had an ultrasound appointment scheduled for next week. Suddenly, the connection we'd shared in Africa and my hopes for something more felt entirely possible again. I got up and rummaged through my bag, my hands shaking as I pulled out a small box I'd brought just in case. Returning to the bed, I opened it to reveal a ring. "Will you marry me?" I asked. Saren's eyes filled with tears, and her face lit up with joy. "Yes, yes, yes," she exclaimed, throwing her arms around me. As we hugged tightly, I realized we needed to share the news with her parents. I quickly dressed and opened the door, only to find Thomas and Elizabeth standing in the hallway, looking surprised. "We'll be right out," I said, grinning. Saren dressed quickly, and together we went to the living room to announce our engagement. Elizabeth didn't look shocked. Mothers always know. But Thomas seemed pleasantly surprised. He wasn't upset about his daughter marrying an American, much to my relief. Saren's POV. 2 days later, we returned to Berlin by train. Jack insisted on accompanying me to my ultrasound appointment, and I was thrilled to have him by my side. After catching up with his family and informing his hospital about our engagement and pregnancy, he seemed more at ease. I overheard snippets of conversations during his call home. "Jack is marrying that German girl from Africa." His family was ecstatic, especially when they learned about the twins. When we arrived at the ultrasound, I was nervous but excited. As the doctor moved the wand over my belly, Jack's eyes locked on the monitor, and I saw a wide smile spread across his face. "Everything looks good," the doctor said, letting us hear the heartbeat. Jack leaned closer to the screen, his expression shifting from amazement to surprise. "Oh, wow!" he exclaimed. I glanced at him, confused. "We're having twins," he said, his voice filled with wonder. The doctor confirmed it, and I burst into tears. Jack held my hand tightly, his face glowing with pride. Jack's POV. Saren and I were married in a small ceremony in Berlin with her parents, a few friends and colleagues from her publishing house. It was intimate and perfect, with about 30 guests in total. Returning to Albany, we decided to settle near my family. I negotiated shorter hospital shifts for less pay, wanting to spend as much time as possible with my pregnant wife. We found a beautiful 4-bedroom house, perfect for raising children, just a short drive from my brother's place. Saren gave birth to twin girls, each weighing nearly 6 pounds. Our lives became a whirlwind of feeding, changing diapers, and trying to snatch moments of sleep. Elizabeth and my mother competed fiercely to be the best grandma, while my dad and Thomas bonded over ambitious plans to renovate and expand our home. I couldn't keep up with their energy and didn't even try. Reflecting on everything, I realized how far I'd come. Losing Louise had been devastating at the time, but her betrayal had ultimately freed me to find true happiness. Meeting Saren had been the stroke of luck that changed everything. If I hadn't gotten a flat tire in Newfoundland that day, I might never have met her. Now, I had a wonderful wife, 2 beautiful children, and a life filled with promise. Saren's POV. After moving to America, Megan and I went shopping for children's furniture at IKEA. While browsing, a woman's intense stare caught my attention. Megan turned, clearly recognizing her. "Hi, Louise," she said flatly, without an ounce of warmth. It didn't take long to piece it together. This was Jack's ex-wife. I had heard about her, of course, but never seen a photo. She was undeniably attractive, but that didn't matter to me. Louise greeted Megan, her tone awkward. "Hey, Megan. How's it going?" Megan's response was sharp and direct. "Louise, this is Saren. She's Jack's wife, and we're shopping for baby furniture. She's having twins." Her words left no room for doubt about who had moved on and who hadn't. Megan gently took my hand, and we walked away. Later, over snacks, Megan filled me in on Louise's story. Most of it I already knew, but hearing it from Megan's perspective made it feel more real. Louise was old news, a part of Jack's past that no longer mattered. That evening, when Jack came home, I told him about the encounter. His reaction was simple. "Good. Now she knows what she missed out on." I dreamed of us riding motorcycles again, traveling the world with our children. While that might be a long way off, Jack's parents had offered us their motorhome for family trips. Our motorcycles might gather dust for now, but that was fine. We had plenty of time to figure it all out.